My name is Dr. Stephen Silk. I'm a chiropractor in my hometown of Wyerton, Ontario in Canada. That's a small town of 2,100 people, about 3 hours north of Toronto. I want to start out by defining what I think a miracle is. And I believe that a miracle is experiencing something that you thought before was impossible, and then after you experience it, recognizing that anything is possible. So, as I was saying before we started rolling the tape, I have a number of different stories that I've been blessed and fortunate enough to participate in with people in my office, recognizing that I'm just flicking switches and that the real miracle is the life within the person. So I was thinking, do I tell a story about my mother and her recovery from end-stage congestive heart failure? And I thought that would be a good story. And I thought, well, maybe I could tell a story about my father recovering from a cerebral hemorrhage, but the woman who was just ahead of me told a very similar story. So I thought I'd tell a story about my godson. His name is Dylan. When Dylan was 9 months of age, he received his routine vaccinations and had a very extreme reaction to the chemistry in the vaccination. And it didn't just weaken his immune system, it totally shut it off. He was unable to create white cells. He was unable to create macrophages, natural killer cells. The normal ability to even create a fever was gone in this little boy. The local physicians attempted to deal with it in the manner they thought was best, I'm sure. They're not evil people, they just do what they do. Antibiotics, antifungals, anti-this, anti-that. They finally decided it was bigger than they could handle, and they sent him down to the Sick Children's Hospital in Toronto, which is kind of the major pediatric facility in the province of Ontario. And they had him for 4 months, if I recall, and he wasn't getting better, he was getting progressively worse. It was to the point where every organ in his body had some type of microbial infestation. His nasal passages, his mouth, his throat, his lungs, his penis, his anus, his colon, everything was infected. The germ world was just having a feeding frenzy on him, much like they might on a carcass on the side of the road. It was very, very scary when I get the phone call from his mother through a referral from a neighbor of hers that perhaps there was a possibility, there was a chance that maybe they could expect the unexpected, which was a recovery for little Dylan. So at this point he's 18 months of age, and they brought him to the office, and I got a phone call that he wasn't well, but I was not prepared for what walked in my front door. Gray, like I've never seen Gray except in maybe a picture or something of someone from a third world country. His little abdomen was distended, much like you see in the third world country, in the malnutrition and starvation states. He hadn't eaten in 2 months. He hadn't had a bowel movement or had a bowel movement in 6 weeks or urinated in a month. His face was sunk in, and you could make out every bone in his skull, and his little eyes had rolled back into his head, and he wasn't opening his eyes. And I'm very anal in my practice for analysis and just determining what parameters are being met to be included in care. And I broke my cardinal rule, which I did not assess him. As his mom was filling out the paperwork, I knew I had to do something, and I had to do it then. So I went into the reception area while his mom was filling out the paperwork, and his dad was holding this little, barely holding on a little bundle of muscle and organ and bone and not much life. And I just intuitively went and I adjusted him, very gently. And his eyes flashed open, and he went rigid, and then he slumped. And his mom freaked. And his dad said, "Was that what you're expecting?" And I said, "Absolutely, that's what I was expecting." I said, "You know what? I think you just take him home and bring him back in 4 hours. I want to adjust him again." And in the 4 hours when he returned, he had color in his cheeks and his eyes were open, and his parents were blown away because his eyes hadn't really opened much in the previous couple months. So I adjusted him again. It wasn't quite the reaction he got the first time, but again, his eyes flashed wide open and his pupils dropped down so you could actually see he has this beautiful hazel eyes. And then he closed his eyes and he fell asleep. And his mother said, "Is that what you're expecting?" I said, "Absolutely. Bring him back tomorrow morning." So I adjusted the boy for probably about 3 months, twice a day, very intensive care compared to most of the children that come through my doors. But as we started to adjust him and life started to course through his system, he started eating. And I made the parents, I said, you cannot feed him crap, no more, no more formula. His mother was unable to breastfeed, and at this point we were probably far enough away from the delivery that it wasn't going to happen anyways. So he was able to eat solid foods, and so we insisted on organic fruits and vegetables cut up small or mushed. And you couldn't put enough food in this little boy for the next 6 months. He just was a voracious little eater, and then he started spiking these really, really hard fevers. And again, parents said, it's 105 degrees Fahrenheit. Were you expecting this? Absolutely. So fast forward now, he just had his 14th birthday. I left out a part at the very start, which is the Hospital for Sick Children, after the 4 months of care down there, told his parents, there's nothing else we can do. He's dying. Take him home, make him comfortable, and contact your funeral home and make the proper decisions that you're going to have to make, because the end is inevitable. I'm really glad that when they brought him to me, they never told me that. They didn't plant that thought in my head. So I never had the slightest doubt that this little boy would become the little man he is today. And it was because of that recovery that his parents honored myself and my wife by asking us to be his godparents. So that's my first miracle that I wanted to talk about. And I guess I will talk about my dad. My dad, a year and a half ago, I was at a conference, which my wife and I do a lot of. She's a chiropractor as well. I got a phone call from my mother on a Sunday morning that they'd taken my father to the hospital. He's having some respiratory distress. So it was a bit of a trip for me to get from where I was back home. And when I arrived, my father had been shipped to the ICU in the next nearest center.